In today's lesson, you need a pen, paper, scissors, and a highlighter or two. So let's get on with the lesson. I'm going to begin by reading you an article by Charlie Brooker. In 5 years' time, all news articles will be a single coloured icon that fires out info nuggets. We're running a special week in which G2 gets taken over by young up-and-coming trainees, explains The Guardian in an email, going on to ask if I'll write something about the future of the media to appear alongside it. I was modern once, about 14 years ago, when The Guardian hired me to write a TV review column on the strength of a website I created. This was back when most websites were hand-stitched pamphlets, 85% of the pages consisting of under-construction GIFs hurriedly Pritt-sticked into place. I say Pritt-sticked, it should probably be Pritt-stuck, but no one's going to correct me because grammar isn't hugely important in the exciting digital future. About 10 minutes later, after I filed my first column, the dot-com bubble burst and people began to wonder if the internet was a fad, a higher resolution version of CFAX running on a next-gen platform. Now, here in the present day, it's clear the internet wasn't a fad. More or less everything else was. Newspapers, for instance, they used to be sombre dossiers issued each morning bringing grave news from Crimea. Now they're blizzards of electric confetti bringing the 10 gravest Crimean developments you simply won't believe. This trend will only continue. In 5 years' time, all news articles will consist of a single coloured icon you click repeatedly to make info nuggets to fly out, accompanied by musical notes. Instead of generating their own content, news sites increasingly exist to paraphrase something somebody else said, or generate ad revenue by attracting reader comments. In much the same way, a jam jar with holes punched in the lid collects wasps. Sadly for editors, in the future, researchers will discover these comments aren't being typed by real-world humans at all. They are, in fact, the agonised howlings of blighted souls trapped in a text-only dimension parallel to our own. Lacking any physical form, these lost and tormented spirits are unable to purchase any products and services and are therefore useless to advertisers. The day after this revelation, what little money remains in the online newspaper industry drops out completely, leaving behind a powerful vacuum that sucks in 2/3 of the internet. All news sites shut down overnight and are replaced with pictures of dogs in sunglasses for idiots to chortle at. Columnists warn gravely of the effect this lack of access to current affairs will have on society, but none of the columnists have columns anymore, so they're reduced to typing this grave warning on Twitter, where no one can hear them over the sound of themselves chortling at the dog photos, apart from their 6 or 7 columnist mates who desultorily retweet it among themselves a few times before putting their smartphone down and crying softly in front of a daytime repeat of MasterChef. Video games and social media will combine to create a world in which you unlock exciting adventures in real life by accruing followers and influence. Each major city will house a glamorous, gentrified enclave to which only successful social brand identities will be permitted entry. Extracts from the second article by Jill Lepore. Does journalism have a future? The wood-panelled tailgate of the 1972 Oldsmobile station wagon dangled open like a broken jaw, making a wobbly bench on which 4 kids could sit, 8 legs swinging. Every Sunday morning, long before dawn, we'd get yanked out of bed to stuff the car's way back with stacks of twine-tied newspapers, clamber onto the tailgate, cut the twine with my mother's sewing scissors, and ride around town, bouncing along on that bench, while my father shouted out orders from the driver's seat. We'd deliver our papers and then run back to the car and scramble onto the tailgate, dropping the coins we'd collected into empty Briggs tobacco tins as we bumped along to the next turn, the newspaper route, our Sabbath. Most newspapers like that haven't lasted. The newspaper mortality rate is old news, and nostalgia for dead papers is itself pitiful at this point. Next came the dot-coms. Craigslist went online in 1996 and spread across the continent like a weed, choking off local newspapers' most reliable source of revenue, classified ads. Then came the fall, when newspapers all over the country, shackled to mammoth corporations and a lumbering, century-old business model, found themselves unable to compete with the online upstarts. There's no shortage of amazing journalists at work, clear-eyed and courageous, broad-minded and brilliant, and no end of fascinating innovation in matters of form, especially in visual storytelling. Still, journalism as a field is as addled as an addict, gaunt, wasted and twitchy, its pockets as empty as its nights are sleepless. It's faster than it used to be, so fast. It's also edgier and needier and angrier. After we'd shoved the last fat Worcester Sunday Telegram inside the last unlatched screen door, we'd head home, my father taking turns a little too fast so that we'd have to clutch at one another and at the lip of the tailgate to keep from falling off. Now we're going to highlight key things from the text. So highlight the title. Let's think about it. Does journalism have a future? Look at the adjectives in the text. Wood-panelled, and the simile, open like a broken jaw. The wobbly bench. The use of verbs like yanked, stuff, and cut. Bouncing on the bench. Think about the use of sibilance or alliteration for the sewing scissors. Highlight that. And how about the metaphor for the newspaper route being our Sabbath? Now let's think about Charlie Brooker's article. His title is very different. He uses alliteration in 5 years' time, and he uses a very certain verb. All news articles will. Think about the kind of things you could spot in this paragraph. His tone is very, very different. Think about the metaphor, hand-stitched pamphlets. Why would he use that? What is he trying to suggest? Think about the tone when he talks about the dot-com bubble bursting 10 minutes after he filed his first column, and the use of colloquialisms. His description of gifts being Pritt-sticked into place. The repetition of the words Pritt-stick. Think about the effect this has on you, the reader. Now looking at the second paragraph in Charlie Brooker's article, I'm interested in the adjectives he uses, and certainly in the comparison. He compares reader comments to the way a jam jar with holes punched in the lids collects wasps. What does that do to the reader? Think about the adjectives he uses. The agonized howlings of blighted souls is how he describes the comments. Lost and tormented spirits. He also repeats the word columnist repeatedly. What does this do? What sound does it make? And why would he use the verb chortled? Now let's go on to the second paragraph in Lepore's article. Think about the simile. She describes the online presence as being spreading like a weed. And she compares this to the journalism in the newspapers, where she describes them as shackled to lumbering century-old business model. She uses personification to describe journalism as an addict, gaunt, wasted and twitchy, pockets as empty as its nights are sleepless. Think about why she would do. Let's imagine the question you were set is to compare how the two writers convey different attitudes towards the future of newspaper journalism.
Them down.
Go. First, we chop up the text. Here, I have cut out interesting metaphors, similes, verbs and adjectives from the opening paragraphs and laid them against one another, taking about 4 different quotes, points I think are interesting, just so that I can look at the two side by side. Breaking up the text like this, you can analyse the different techniques the writers have used. Let's look at them in more detail. This simile that Jill Lepore has written is quite interesting. Think about why she would use it. What tone does it convey to us as readers? Why has she used the word yanked? It's quite an interesting verb to use here, isn't it? It's quite violent, potentially. Similarly with stuff. And here, the sibilance and alliteration employed in sewing scissors. Does this add to the sense of memory and nostalgia that she's trying to convey? Think about why she would employ this particular phrase here. And again, another verb that's quite violent. With the newspaper route, our Sabbath, what does this metaphor do? It creates a kind of sacred memory, doesn't it? Think about why she would use it. What tone does it give the whole piece? Is it nostalgic? Is it reflective? Or is it menacing with those verbs, like cut? And then on to Charlie Brooker. He sets it in the past immediately. He talks about the time that has passed. But his isn't nostalgic in the same way that Lepore's article is. Think about why he starts the paragraph this way. What is he referring to? This metaphor is interesting, describing websites as hand-stitched pamphlets. It's a jokey reference, setting a sarcastic tone. The alliteration of prit-sticked into place. Why do you think he's written that? And using hyperbole here, the exaggeration of suggesting the dot-com bubble burst 10 minutes after he filed his first column. His tone is quite different. It's jovial or jokey. Or does it come across to you as sarcastic? Perhaps it's quite colloquial and humorous. Think about the difference between these two articles. One nostalgic, reflective, somber, even with menacing undertones. The other jovial, sarcastic. Think about how you receive this as a reader and what it conveys about their different points of view. Now we come on to the second paragraph that I've isolated. Think about the simile of describing the online working like a weed choking off local newspapers. Compare that to the adjectives where she describes the newspaper industry as lumbering, centuries old. And this personification is really interesting, describing journalism as an addled addict, its pockets as empty as its nights are sleepless. What does this convey to the reader? What does this suggest she as a writer wants to show us about the newspaper industry and what it's turned into? Its age, its state of being. Why would she want to suggest this? What does she want us to think about? Think about the adjectives, gaunt, wasted and twitchy. And here, what we sometimes call the rule of three, or repetition. What's the effect of this? It's edgier, needier, and angrier. Compare that with the description of journalism as an addict. Think about why she might have used these two different techniques, what she wanted to suggest. Now let's look at Charlie Brooker. The second piece here, he talked about comments as being like wasps trapped in a jam jar. What does this suggest? It's jokey, of course. What is that making us think about comments, the way that they buzz around, perhaps? Why would he want to make that comparison between the two things? What does it do? And here his description of comments, like the agonized howlings of blighted souls. Think about the use of the adjective, agonized. What does this metaphor do? And the verb trapped, what does this suggest? He repeats columnists quite a lot. What's the effect of this? Particularly of repeating the sound C. It creates a lot of chatter, a lot of a very particular noise. And then going back to the jovial, jokey attitude of the piece, think about using the verb chortling and what that makes us think of. I like to employ what's called the squid technique when answering these kinds of questions. You start with a statement the writer uses, employs, or describes. Then you go on to quote something from the text as your evidence. And then you infer from this. What does this use of language or structure imply? And finally, develop. Think about what effect this will have on the reader. So when we do close analysis, we break it up into a technique, what the writer uses. We quote directly from the text. So in this case, we've chosen the simile from the pause article. And then we go on to the analysis itself. What does this show, or suggest, or convey? Think about the question you're given at the beginning. Why would the writer choose this particular simile? What tone does it convey to us? What does it suggest? What comparison is she trying to make? Reference or allusion is she trying to draw? What is the emotive effect on the reader? Here we're thinking about the metaphor used by Charlie Brooker when he describes websites as hand-stitched pamphlets. Clearly this is a jovial reference, but what is he trying to convey or suggest here? Why would he use that? Think about what effect this has on the reader. What does it imply? And here, with the personification of journalism as an addict that we discussed earlier. Here, thinking about this personification of journalism as an addict, why would the writer use that particular description? What does it suggest she thinks about the state of journalism today? Why make that comparison? Why put that picture in our minds? And with this metaphor from Charlie Brooker's article, think about the particular adjectives he chooses: agonized, blighted. They conjure up quite a horrific picture, don't they? What is he trying to suggest? Is it in keeping with the jovial tone in the rest of the article? When we're looking at close analysis, we choose to think about tone and structure. What we want to know is what is the effect on the reader? Why have they chosen this particular technique here? What does it do? What does it suggest? What does it convey to us? This is what your close analysis is designed to show. With the repetition again. Edgier, needier, angrier. What's the effect? You can also start from the actual quotation. Let's say you pick out the verb chortling. You know what the technique is. Can you then move on to tell us something interesting about what Brooker is trying to suggest? Once you've got your close analysis, you need to link your points together. Here are some useful words. Firstly, you can say, and then secondly, or even alternatively. Remember here that you're trying to compare two different texts. So on the one hand, this text says this. On the other hand, this writer suggests something else. However, in contrast, remember, you're thinking about the squid method for answering this question. You make a statement, you quote from the text, you make an inference, and you develop your ideas. I would encourage you to look through magazines newspapers, and online articles. Find phrases that you find interesting, well written. See where you can recognise techniques being used. Why not create a scrapbook of all your favourite sentences, ideas and words? Just like this one.